You'd all understand this because, I know we're all attached to our phones and we know how valuable they are. It wasn't the cost. I don't care about the cost of the phone, but I do care about everything that's on it. And Margaret will tell you how much time I've spent this week making phone calls. I actually went back there to look for it on Tuesday, doing all that sort of thing to try, giving a police report, all that sort of stuff. And of course, I prayed that someone will hand it in, and I'm going to keep praying that way. In fact, one of the little bits of hope I've got is that I've got 2 library cards in the pocket of the phone. So hopefully, with my name in it, hopefully some nice person will find it. But there's no guarantee. My faith in God and that He answers prayer cannot guarantee that I'll find my phone. Let's have a look at a few verses at the beginning of Hebrews 11. Thanks, Scott. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith, our ancestors received approval. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, for whoever would approach Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him. That is the start of a great chapter in Hebrews, and I know lots of us will know about it, where it lists a whole lot of kind of heroes of faith in the Bible, right from the Old Testament through the Old Testament. Lots of them are names that we know, and it basically just touches on them. It gives a lot of time to Abraham, but a lot of the others, it's just in a sentence or a little phrase. And they're heroes, and I want us to get this. There are 2 points about this. These are the 2 things that stand out about this list of people. 2 things. First one is that people in the Old Testament had nothing but the promises of God to rest on. And one of the commentators, I've put it really well. Can we have the next one? Thanks, Scott. So this is what he says. So much did these promises mean to them that they regulated the whole course of their lives in light of these promises. The promises related to a state of affairs belonging to the future. But these people acted as if that state of affairs was already present. So convinced were they that God could and would fulfill what He had promised. The second thing about these people in this list is they're commended for their living faith. Not just because they believed in God, not because they believed in the 10 Commandments, or the virgin birth, or for serving as priests in the temple, or for being faithful churchgoers, but that they demonstrated their faith by the way they lived. So here's a question. Well, what exactly were they commended for, these people? I wanted to just summarize this, but I think it's worth us reading these few verses. So I'm going to read this fast because there's a number of verses. It's like a summary. It's like the writer runs out of trying to detail them. So he kind of like puts the rest of it in the summary, and this is what it is. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. So here's a bit of a summary of that. And, I pulled out a few things. Yeah, there might be a lot more that you can get out of that, and we can get out of it. Here's a summary. They had courage. They showed courage. They suffered for what was right. They showed perseverance when they were tested. They took risks. They broke new ground. So here's another question. All these people's names, and like if the guy had more room, he'd probably mention other names that we know of in the Bible. So, did these heroes of faith always succeed? Is that why they're up there? Because they were always successful? No. They failed sometimes. We know that. We know their stories. But here's a few just to jog your memory. Jacob is in that list. Jacob, this is the person who tricked his brother twice. And it wasn't like a little playful trick. It was a pretty sizable trick. He tricked his brother off his birthright. David, we all know about David. Great David, who at one stage fell, committed adultery, tried to cover it up, lied, murdered to cover it up, all those things. David. And Jephthah. Now, I picked on him because I didn't know. I had to go back and read in the book of Judges about Jephthah. Now, this is the book of Judges. You don't want to go and read it without being a little bit aware. It's a gruesome, it's like an R-rated book, the book of Judges. So you want to know that this was in a really bad time of Israel's history. And there were some terrible things that happened. And I love the Bible because it doesn't hide stuff from us, and it puts it all out there. It's not saying that, everything we read in the Bible isn't good. It's just saying, this is what happened, and this is how God worked with people, and this is what people did to other people. So Jephthah, firstly, he was the son of a prostitute, and in his culture, because of that, he was chased away from his home. He couldn't live with his family. But there was constantly enemies of God's people fighting them. They hadn't actually got their established themselves in the land yet. There's constant enemies fighting with them. And the people went to Jephthah and said, could you come and lead us? And he said, you just sent me away, and now you want me to come and lead you? But they convinced him. And he did, and he was successful. And he led them. And, he was probably a bit rough around the edges, but he was obviously a good leader, and they recognized that. He led them, and he said, and he helped to win the battle, but he made a promise, and he said, the first person that comes out of my house, I will, God, if you give us this battle, I will sacrifice to you. Something like that. Stupid thing. And his only daughter ran out of the house, and he sacrificed his daughter. Now that's crazy, I know that, and that God doesn't approve that. But that's what happened. This is Jephthah, and he is in the list of the heroes of faith. Abraham, as I said, he gets a lot of time, and so he should, because Paul says in Romans 4:15, he is the father of faith. He's our father. He's the father of our faith. And he failed a few times despite God's promises. So here was a promise he got from God at the beginning. In Genesis 12, God says to him, Abraham, go from your country, like walk off the map, go from your people and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. So, Then we look at the story of Abraham for the next number of chapters, maybe the next 10 chapters. And we see that God makes a promise and then he fails. So in chapter 13, despite God's promise, in a famine, he goes to Egypt. He strikes trouble in Egypt. He lies about the identity of his wife to save his own skin. First falling that we know of. But God rescues him out of that. He gets out of that situation. A number of chapters later, so God had promised Abraham, from this promise that I just read to you from Genesis chapter 12, God had promised him that he would have an heir, and he would be blessed, and that he would continue to be a blessing to the nations. But he was old, and his wife was old. And so as time went on, he struggled with that promise. Could this be for me? And he thought of another way, and his wife thought of another way to fulfill the promise. So she said, here's my servant Hagar. You sleep with her and have that heir, because I'm not going to be able to do it. So he did. And Ishmael, as we know it, was born. And then again, a bit later, God repeats the promise. He says, no, Abraham, I'm going to give you an heir, and it's through Sarah, your wife. And 1 year before that actually was fulfilled, he fell again, because there was a local king, Abimelech, and a similar thing happened. And again, he lied about the identity of Sarah. But again, God rescued him out of that situation. And then finally, Isaac was born, and Abraham, as we know, had a really big test with Isaac. God asked him to sacrifice Isaac, but of course, God provided, it was like a test, and God provided the sacrifice of a ram. And we would say that Abraham got it right by then. But maybe it shows us that God assesses our lives with him, not just in one event or in one day or in one part of time, but right through the journey of our lives. It's about a whole walk with him. And there are many things that we have to learn. So I just want to turn it back to us now. What about our own failures? We could probably all look back at the past and think about failures. I certainly can think of. I can think of two notable failures in my life when I tried my hardest to do things right, but it didn't work out. Once was a very long time ago, when I was studying. So I worked in accounting for a few years after uni, and I was studying to be a chartered accountant. Did the most difficult study I've ever done in my life. I was working full time, studying, sometimes doing assignments till 4 a.m, and I failed. So I didn't get there. The second one was a lot longer when we came back to Benin, and I decided I would work in church. Came back from Benin, came back from Africa. I decided I was going to work at churches, and I went for ordination with the Baptist Union. And the first time I tried, I failed. I wasn't passed. And it took me a while to get over that. And I think it was mainly because I had felt that people had trusted me and my family to go overseas and work in a different culture. And I guess I was feeling that I needed the affirmation of my colleagues here in Victoria that I could lead in churches, and that was hard too, that failure, but eventually that all kind of worked out, and so yeah, it was all good. But I failed in other ways too, and I think you can identify with. I failed because of disobedience. I failed because of sin. I failed because I've held grudges. I failed because I've condemned people, and I'm guessing most of you could identify with at least some of that. So does God mind that we fail? Sure. He doesn't approve of sin. But not just those typical sins, that sins like immorality or addiction or unforgiveness or hatred. But things like disobedience, when we hear his voice, but we disobey. When we heed advice from the wrong sources. When we succumb to bad habits. When we spend resources and energy on things we know are not what really matters. God does want us to sort those things out, and he will continue to teach us to get those things right. But what still counts to him is our walk of faith, our walk of faith. Look at Abraham's story. God didn't punish him for those failures, because for God, it's the journey of faith that counts more than our successes. It's about faithfulness to him rather than getting it right every time. I think most of us here have taken, I think we wouldn't be here today if we hadn't taken that step of faith to trust in Jesus' sacrifice for our sins and for the life we now live. The faith that's been talked about in Hebrews 11 is more about the relationship we have with God through Jesus, rather than a kind of faith that you sometimes hear, if you really have enough faith to believe this would happen for you and this prayer would work and so on. It's more the walk of faith. It's the faith that we all celebrate with Jesus because he saved us and he's given us a new life. It's that faith. Now, I'm not saying that I don't want to have the faith to pray in ways that I know that God will answer my prayers. And I think I'm learning. I'm still on that journey, but I'm learning how to do that. And sure, I want him to answer my prayers about my phone. I want to get my phone back. But I know that if I don't get it back, my faith is in God and in what gets me through life. He is what gets me through life. All of us are children of God if we have taken that step of faith. We are already his child. And now by the Holy Spirit living inside us, we're learning to live up to that. But that's God's work to do. It's our job to listen and to walk with him. To listen and to walk with him. He is our loving Father. He's not so much down on us when we fail as that he wants us to get up and resume the life of faith and learn. So how will we go forward into the future? The future is important. Well, let's recall the people of faith. They had courage. We'll need courage to go forward. We'll need to persevere when we are tested. We'll need to be able to take risks. We have to, someone has coined this phrase, which I really like. We have to learn to walk off the map. What happens? We went to a place where we hadn't been to a long time during the week, and we constantly use Siri, Google. But what would happen if you're somewhere and you can't use Siri and you feel a bit lost and, you haven't got access to it, and you're sort of finding your way through the streets of Melbourne or Victoria or whatever, and in unfamiliar territory. But the fact is that the life of faith is sometimes like that, and God is with us. And we have to be prepared to step out, take risks. We have to be prepared to suffer. But suffering comes in different forms, there are some sorts of suffering. I don't think I could ever do it, but I hear and I see other people suffer. And I think, wow, I couldn't do that. Suffering comes in different forms. And for people of faith, even suffering has a purpose. Listen to this in Hebrews 12:11. Now, discipline always seems painful rather than pleasant at the time. But later, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. To those who have been trained by it. God wants us to walk with him by faith, and that walk is purposeful. It's not for nothing. Even our failures, it's how we learn to be his children. And the last thing is that these people were prepared to embrace new things. Think of Daniel. Daniel and his three friends at the beginning of the book of Daniel. He says to the supervisor, they're working for the king of Babylon, and he says to the supervisor, he's trying to train them and make them into competent officials. They've got to eat the king's food, the best food of the king. But Daniel doesn't want to compromise because of his own food laws as an Israelite. He says, I can't do this. But the man says, oh, I'll get in trouble from the king. I'll get my head chopped off. And Daniel says, hang on, give us the chance. Let us eat our diet and give us 10 days. See if you think we're any better off or any worse off from not having the king's food. And sure enough, they were better off. See, Daniel was prepared to try something new. Well, he took a risk, but he suggested it, and God was with him. He took a risk of faith, and God was with him, and it worked. I think of the religious leaders that often opposed Jesus. I don't think they were necessarily all bad, but I think they were misdirected. At a certain point, they wanted to stay with what they knew. They wanted to be safe, and it seemed like Jesus was walking off their map, so they killed him. And it stands to reason that what we're saying about how this all applies to us as individuals, it stands to reason, because the Bible is about God and his people and God and his church, that these same things that apply to us as individuals apply to us as a church. We need courage as we walk into the future. We need courage. We need perseverance when things get tough. We need to be able to take risks. We need, in our suffering, to know that there is a purpose for it. We need to be able to embrace the new. I want to end with this story. Scott, if we can have the last slide. I think there are some familiar people there for you. So we had this great week a couple of weeks ago with our family, and it's great when you haven't seen some of your family for nearly 3 years, and then you see them, and sometimes you're living with them. We had about 8 days together. And we saw how Catherine and Mike had to work with little Simon and Thomas. And we saw the commitment of parents. And one night when we were away with them, we said to them, why don't you go out for tea and we'll put the kids to bed. Now, what they told us, like we sort of knew this, but what they told us was this was the first night that they had been away from their kids and hadn't put them to bed for 3 years, for the last 3 years. And as we kind of watched them and enjoyed time with them, we could see, little Thomas was actually had a really bad cold. So in the midst of some of the happier times, he was also struggling for a few days and a bit miserable. And so, that wasn't going to sleep well at night and waking up during the night and all that sort of stuff. And we lived it with them. And yet we saw some of the wonderful times and we enjoyed part of that ourselves. And, you watch these kids say new words and little Simon, 4.5 Simon, comes up with this kind of profound little things. He asked us something about what does the word inspiration mean, and then 2 days later he actually used an example of it, like he'd taken it all in, and we see all that and we think this is amazing. But if we said to Catherine and Mike, you know, if you kind of look at all this, look how hard it is sometimes. Do you have any regrets, you know, for having kids and doing all this? What do you think they would say? I'm sure that they would say, not at all, no regrets. You know, you just take that, somehow you just get used to that. And you all know, you people, you know, lots of you who've been parents or, you know, have sort of had to work with families or other people. You know, you go through these things, they're hard. Sometimes you wonder how you'll ever get through it. You get tired, you get despondent, all that sort of stuff. But you also see the joy of it. You see the fruit, and it's fantastic. You know, I cannot believe, you know, I'm walking around just the other day with Margaret, and I say to her, you know, it's just wonderful. You just get these little images of Thomas doing something new, and you sort of almost kind of rejoice. You know, you kind of celebrate that again and again. Excuse me, I am just describing what it's like to be a grandparent. Sorry about that. I'll stop talking about that. But they would say it's all worth it. And the life of faith is like that. It is really an adventure. It's an adventure. You know, these heroes, and this is the other thing I want to leave you with this thought. These heroes that we talked about in Hebrews 11, they're not just the heroes of the Bible, because after the Bible times, for centuries, we've had heroes of faith. And I want to say that those of us who live like them, despite and in the midst of all our failures, we are God's heroes now. You are God's heroes now. This is the life of faith that we are called to. Keep walking with Him and never give up. And that's what we're going to sing now. I forgot. I'm not sure if we mentioned that there was a church meeting. Yes. Did we mention it? No. Do we want to just say what's the procedure, or there's a few new people here that just want to know what's going on?
Well, no, we'll have a bit of fellowship, and if you brought some lunch, have that, and we'll get started. I don't know, maybe 12:12.
Back
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And and there's going to be a cup of tea afterwards at the window there. Thanks, Sarah. And also, this is if a lot of people direct debit, but if you want to contribute to the weekly offering, this is the tray for it. If you've got small change, we raise money for some missionaries who work overseas for the work that they do there. So loose change, normal offering. Have faith in God. Keep walking by faith as you go through this week, and have courage. Enjoy your week.
No, he was asking me about he said he online or something. No worries. Yeah, I want to find the set of opposites. Oh, she comes through. No worries.